Good afternoon, everyone. This honorable house now resumes. Good afternoon, everyone. The floor is open for remarks on the late Honorable Vernon Malone. I'm minded to remind everyone of the speaker's ruling on a 20-minute time limit per member as well, please. The floor is now open. We recognize the member for the ninth, the Honorable. Yes, sir.
What's the relevance behind the time limit? It's kind of unorthodox. I'll let you know the relevance.
I recognize the senior member's statement and his opinion. I think in the matter of urgency and moving forward with the House, not negating the significance of the contributions of the late Honorable Malone, I think some leeway can be given to the senior member, but we're also trying to make sure that things move along swiftly. The chair recognizes Honorable Kairima, please.
Mr. Speaker, I think the time limit last night was in relevance to any other business and not speaking
Understood.
on the resolution.
I stand corrected. So we will move forward with no time limit pertaining to the remarks for the late Honorable Vernon Malone. My gratitude to the members for the correction.
Put a limit on yourself.
Member for the ninth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to say a few words on the passing of the late, great attorney Vernon E. Malone. I think the first time I heard the name Vernon E. Malone must have been my early 20s or late teens. He was a family friend, and so I knew the name very, very early. I came to know him much better much later on. One of my first interactions with Mr. Malone must have been in the early 80s, somewhere around 83 or so, when I was the recipient of a piece of Crown land. There were actually quite a few of us at that time. And he was the person who did the transfer. As a matter of fact, he did it for a number of us, not just me. He helped us transfer the little house allotment from the Crown into our names. I remember very clearly because back in those days, the Crown land was so cheap. Though his fee was very low, it was more than the actual cost of the land. So I always remember that being such an anomaly. But I know him being that kind of a helpful person from way back when. I came much closer with him, I think, when he was in Commissioner of Police. He lived a well-lived life, well accomplished as attorney, police, commissioner of police, and then he was a member of the same honorable house here, which is why we're here, paying tribute to him today. Well, after he got elected, one of his favorite places to be, he had several favorite places, but one of them was done by Capriccio. And he would sit there and then he would always create a gathering around him. And of course, on my way to the boat, I would join the gathering. One of the things I came to understand about Vernon, when you're around Vernon, you almost guarantee two things. You're going to be laughing and you're going to be eating. And so sometimes will be a few of us, but before, I always left them to catch the ferry. But those numbers would grow from maybe 3 or 4 to something up to 8 or 10. We'd all gather there, and of course, when the time for the ferry came, I would leave, and God knows how late it would have gone. But Vernon, he loved people, and he loved to be around people, and he loved sharing. I remember sometimes things would get so good at Capriccios, he would invite us to his home. I spent many a days, and we stayed overnight over at Isis Villa. Again, a wonderful cook, conversationalist. You know, I love guavas. I had a guava tree there, so whenever it was guava season, she would always call me and go over there and get some guavas, whatever fruits was in season, plums, and we would sit and chat. Even after he took ill, I still would go now and again and look for him and spend time with him. And I think he really appreciated that. But he was very kind to us for many, many years. I remember, if it wasn't over at Bros Bay, he had what we used to call a country home up on the place called Spring Gut. And so on a Saturday, we'd leave Oceanada, there'd be a bunch of us, we'd come down, and we'd go and Spring Gut that day. Of course, Warner would be there in his element. Be sometimes shellfish on that grill, whatever it was, guys playing dominoes, jokes flying in the bar somewhere in the back. And he really enjoyed that kind of camaraderie. He was an excellent storyteller. I could sit and listen to Warner talk about his experiences in travel, his training. And he wrote a lot in politics, and he'd be telling us about theoretical politics and practical politics and all kind. And we just sit and listen to him talk. But I really learned a lot from him in the arena of politics, in the arena of law, in the arena of being a good human being. He was a good human being. I used to enjoy him in the house. He would get passionate sometimes about the things he spoke about. And I remember, I don't recall the year, they were debating some bill. He was very displeased. He was a backbencher. He was very displeased with the way monies were allocated and were being spent. And he got up in the house and he gave the government, his own government, a tongue lashing that day about their spending habits. I wouldn't use the words he used, but he gave his own party because he was that passionate, and he thought that what they were doing, the way they were going, was not the way they should have gone. But that's the man for one was he believed in to do things a particular way, that he was elected for the people. One of the things he was passionate about was telecommunications. He always thought it was unfair what was happening at that time in telecommunications. I think you paid to send a call, and you paid to receive a call. And you would talk about all the people you would see along the Western Road trying to get a signal call overseas or something. And he really worked really hard to push to make sure that telecommunication moved to a level to what we enjoy today. He was a significant player in that. A lot of young lawyers got their start right at Warner Malone Law Firm. I think he understood that they would come there, they would learn a few things, and they would move on. And many of them did just that. They walked with him and his law firm, they got their feet wet, they moved on, and many today are doing their own private practice, thanks to his tutelage and him giving them the opportunity to come and work with him and get a better understanding of the legal fraternity. I will miss him dearly. I bring my condolences to Isis and Malcolm and his wider family. So he had a life well lived. His contributions to this country, though in politics was short, he served in many other areas besides just politics. Like I said, he was also police, commissioner of police. He served in his house. He was an attorney. And he did all he could to help as many as he could. So, Mr. Speaker, for those few words there, I thank you very kindly.
Thank you, Honorable. Any other member would like to offer their remarks, please? I recognize the Leader of the Opposition, Honorable Ronnie Skelton. Your microphone.
It's okay, John. You can hear me? Let me start over. Mr. Speaker, I rise to give my contributions on the resolution before this House from Mr. Vaughan and Malone. And I want to first extend my sincerest and deepest condolences to his wife Isis and his son Malcolm. I think if you have someone like Isis and Malcolm looking after you, I think you will be well looked after, because for the last few years, that was their job, and they did a fantastic job, and I applaud them for that. You know. But Mr. Speaker, if you live as long as some of us do, I see three of us are in here, you couldn't help but knowing Mr. Malone, Vernon. Mr. Malone, you know, I know of Mr. Malone way back in the 80s, when he was a police constable, and then he rose through the ranks. And we really got together to do good for this country as a member of the Rotary Club of Rotown. It was then Rotary Club of Tatola too. And he and I about 25 more members got together and formed that club, where he was a charter member and I was the charter president. And every Saturday, religiously, Vernon and I and some others will go out to do projects in the community. And I remember one that he brought before us, that is the Rotary Club, which is to build a house for an elderly gentleman that was living in a bad way, up in up in Etne, just off Sage Mountain. And the man, Mr. Klein, we built a house, we put in bathroom facilities and put electricity for Mr. Klein. Because we believe that there shouldn't be anyone in this country living like that. And we put our hands together. We actually physically, with the help of some of his police officers who were then contractors and stuff at the time, to help out Mr. Klein. Vernon was a generous kind of person when it comes on helping people. And, you know, I look back on those days where we used to get up every Saturday and go and try to do something good in our society. And Vernon and, like I said, 25 or 26 other members, some have gone on, some are still with us. But that's what our contribution. We were, as these younger ones will turn to us, we were young upstarts, you know. We were back from colleges and universities, and we were willing to give back to our society wherever we can. And I remember us going from East End to West End along the shoreline, picking up bags of garbage just for public works to come along and take the bags off the side of the road. And he was a community-minded person. I don't think his contribution to this society will be properly articulated without some historians really studying some of these quiet people, what they did, the contributions they have made to this society. So between 91 and when the Rotary Club was formed until his illness, he was known to be a chartered member of that club. And I show the president and the members of that club will give their contributions to the life of Mr. Malone. I know Mr. Malone also in this house when I was part of a government gone, and we were doing bills, and he had to be here as a witness, so to be question and guide us on what should be in these bills. Now remember two famous ones. the Noise Abatement Act, which the deputy premier, talk about on a regular basis. I see the bike people noise level have gone down. I don't think they got down because you're the deputy, no. But that was one of the bills, and it was one of those long bills. I showed you the member for the third could remember the questioning we had for Mr. Malone concerning this, because noise back then was a problem. People were just being unkind to their communities, and it's here again. So you wonder if everything, there's a time and season for everything under the sun. I don't know if the season has passed for the noise, or it's because it was back here in the 90s, the late 90s. The noise was heavy, and now it's back in 22, 23. So I don't know if it's a 20-year cycle for noise. Mr. Speaker, the other bill that had a long discussion on to is the, and I hope the AG could correct me, the tint law, where the blackout for vehicles, because again, during those times in the early 90s, the early 2000s, late 90s, there was a spate of crime and gunplay in the country, where shots were fired, people were injured, and Mr. Malone at that point in time feels that tint vehicles were contributing to the unsafe environment for policing in the country. So he was for removing all tint from vehicles, especially the front windows and front side and windows. But it seems like that has gone away, And Mr. Speaker, on a side note, I could never understand, and I can't, even if you explain it to me, why a rental vehicle needs to have tinted windows. I could never understand that. Yeah, I heard that, but, so it's here again, and unfortunately, there is a bill that will be laid before this House to talk about policing and some of the shortcomings and very, very shortcomings of our police force in tackling crime. And there are some you're driving a vehicle, or you're walking along the street, somebody with a tinted vehicle, pull up beside you, you don't know who's in it, you don't know what, on a public road. It's becoming a little dangerous in this society, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, so that was two of the bills. There were many others because he had to come before us to basically justify, not in the sense that we didn't know, but tell us what he plans to do. I forget what those numbers were back then. The police at that time budget was second or third to the education and healthcare. And I don't know if it's still there because I haven't seen the final numbers. But he had to come here before the House during the Standing Finance Committee meeting, and he was well prepared. He knows what he wanted, and he told us what he wanted. I don't think at that time, Mr. O'Neill at one time was the premier, the chief minister. And he was one of those who recommended Vernon to be the commissioner. So, you know, he was always very sympathetic to the police, and he gave them whatever they asked for, based on limitation, that is. One of the things you find, Mr. Speaker, is that whenever people come here to ask for monies, and I think the member for the 8 brought it up, they ask for lots of money, you give it to them, but at the end of the year, the monies you give have not been used for the purposes that they were intended to be used for. So they go back, the money go back into the consolidated fund. And that is not good if you're trying to build institutions. Because in order for us to make the next leap, you know, I consider us based on where I was as a boy, growing up in Vernon was as a boy, because we all grew up, you know, feeding pigs, goats, shearing goats. We all do those simple things that was common back then. Everybody it was a part of life. You know, I listened to a former member talking about feeding pigs salt water so he could get a little more for his pig. But you know, that's what Vernon and people like myself, I think he was a bit older than I am. That's what we do. That's what you had to help your parents do. But we never pick up the trade. We never follow through with the trade because our parents wanted a better life for us, and they didn't understand that the life that they were living was better than the one they were looking out for us. But that's how life is, Mr. Speaker. So Vernon, the Rotarian, Vernon, the Commissioner of Police, and Vernon, the lawyer. You know, you hear about story. I have never had the opportunity to use his services like the member for the 9th did. But, you know, you always need people like lawyers like Mr. Malone to assist the poor and the downtrodden. Because while the big firms will probably do some pro bono work in the courts, lawyers like Mr. Malone, and then they will always, you know, do some work for you, and you pay them when you can. And in those days, people paying their bills was, you could have come to somebody's shop, go to somebody, get services. People paying their bill was not a problem because once you owe, it was like if you don't pay your bill, you're going to hell when you die. And people actually make it their business to go and pay their bill. It's not so anymore. So Vernon carried that all the way into his legal practice, because that's how we were brought up. And I commend him for that service. You know, you hear during his term as the Commissioner of Police, and I show people who want to be honest, you know, it's a difficult job, but someone has to do the job. And Vernon volunteered and went to do the job. I remember Mr. Samuel, when I left high school, he came to my father to inquire whether or not I want to be a police officer. And I asked a simple question at that point in time. And this was in the 70s. I asked a simple question, are they going to be walking with guns? Because when I used to go down by the government house, they had a police officer with a stick called a baton, guarding the governor 24/7. And I didn't consider that but that's what it was in them days. And crime was not anything. There were 3 police officers back then. I think when Mr. Samuel came, it probably went to about 15 or 20. conking those in the sister islands. Now we have 400 and, how much? And we still have some serious issues confronting us. So the resolution, Mr. Speaker, calls for Mr. Malone lying in state here on Thursday, like every other member who passed through this house and have made their contributions and gone to the great beyond. Mr. Malone will be here Thursday and put Thursday, no?
Yeah. You may have go ahead.
They're being technically correct. Mr. Malone remains will be here. We'll be here for us to pay our last respect. And there is a program where the family force and then elected members, present and past, and then the general public to pay the last respect to the remains of Mr. Malone. And then the funeral is on Saturday, where again there will be a procession to the sporting complex where the funeral will be held, and after that the burial in Bruce Bay by his home. So, Mr. Speaker, we have lost another, and we will continue to lose members who have made their contribution in this house. You know, it's not a good time in this country's life to be a member of this house. It seems like there is a big roller, a big paintbrush that is painting all of us in a way that is totally unacceptable. And that is not fair, and those of us who call this country home needs to pay attention, because it's legacies like Mr. Walwin Malone that they're tampering with, you know, because they're going back all the way into the 20 years, 30 years ago, and they're really destroying what we believe to be good service, and basically replacing it with their level of service, and they don't have anything better than what we have done. Yes, we have made some mistakes. Yes, there were things that we should correct, and yes, we are willing to correct those things. But to continue to destroy our country and our people cannot be the way that we should accept at all, Mr. Speaker. It is troubling. I know we will have a lot to say next Tuesday on this bill, on this report that will be laid before the House. But, you know, I am just saying that reports like those, you know, destroy the legacy of all the people. Well, I know we used to have a lot of pictures on this wall. I don't know when they're coming back. The history of this house, from the clerks to the speakers who sat in the chair, and the members who passed through this house, whether 1 term, 2 term, 3 term, 7 terms, they were all here on these walls, so we can understand the history. And you know, each one in their own way have made a contribution to get us where we are today. And Walwin is no exception. And I just want to wrap up and say, Mr. Speaker, that to his wife, again, Isis, and his son, Malcolm, Walwin has done good for our country. He has done, when you put it in the balance, he has done good. And he will be missed. And they have nothing to worry about but to be proud of a man that they know. With Those few words, Mr. Speaker, I take my seat.
Thank you, Leader of the Opposition. I recognize the Junior Minister for Agriculture and Fisheries.
I too am pleased to speak on the resolution before the House as we honor our fallen comrade Vernon Elroy Malone. I think Vernon is what I would call a significant Virgin Islander. A number of us would have had opportunities to play roles, but at the time we played it, lends a level of significance. So in speaking about Mr. Malone, I'll speak of him first as the Commissioner of Police of the Virgin Islands. So the Leader of the Opposition would have spoken of the time when there were only 3 policemen around, and those would go further back and say when there was 1 and a number of village constables were holding down the fort, and holding it down well, I might add. But by the time I came along, Madam Speaker, and started to know myself, the Commissioner of Police role was one that seemed to be reserved for those from elsewhere. And even I would say typically from the UK, and typically not of African descent. So when Mr. Malone became commissioner in 1992, when I reflected upon it and the sense of pride that I personally felt and that you felt in the community, it threw me back to a couple of sporting, back and forward, Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, to a couple of sporting events. In 1987, when the national softball team was competing at the Pan American Games and beating countries multi times our size, the Cuba and America and Canada and all these places, there was a sense of swelling pride here in the Virgin Islands as the news came back each day with respect to the outcome of the various games. And while there are many other things of which we would be proud, I think we started again when Karen McMaster so skillfully acquitted himself over the 400-meter hurdles to win medals at the World Championships. And I thought the feeling that I had when Warren Malone became commissioner in that category, I believe many others felt that way as well. And Warren would have been well trained as a police officer. I think like he would have started in Barbados and would have taken on many other trainings that would have been offered to him in the region and outside the region. And at that stage, he was probably well suited to be Commissioner of Police after those years in service. But he went a step forward. He went and took on the challenge of earning a degree in law. He went and took on that challenge of earning a degree in law. And with that, it gave him, I would say, an undeniable right to be named as the Commissioner of Police of the Virgin Islands when he made that application. I mentioned the time when he pursued a law degree because that is when I first got to know Vernon Malone. It was a name I had heard. He was a senior police officer. I knew the name, but it was really at that time when I myself began to pursue studies at the University of the West Indies in 1986. I heard that there was this gentleman, Vernon Malone, police officer Vernon Malone was around, but I hadn't met him. I'd never met him before that time. And as a young boy, just beginning university studies, first time being away from home for any significant time, you simple things you start to realize. All along you felt as if there was no distinct Virgin Islands accent. You know, we spoke normally and other people spoke differently. But I was sitting in the cafeteria one day, and when I heard someone say, "Miss, what kind of chicken I have in there?" I said, "That's a Virgin Islander." And it was born on E. Malone. And that was the occasion we met, and it led to many of good occasions at the university and since that time. At that time, of course, his sparring partner was the late Noel Vanterpool. And Noel and Vernon, you spend time with them, you'll be laughing from start to finish, in addition to the wisdom that they would impart. You'll also have opportunity, if you so desire, to get some drinks in some little small glasses, but I didn't indulge as much at that time. But certainly the time when we were there was a time that you start to realize that there were Virgin Islanders who had experience, who understood life as we face it in the Virgin Islands, and had vision and contributions to make as far as moving the country forward. When we both returned to the territory, we would have had an opportunity to interact both in his role in the police department and mine at the H. Lavely Stout Community College. And so the relationship continued. He was always one willing to give sage advice. And certainly when in 2015 I decided to contest elected politics, he was there to give advice to me as well. I wouldn't bother share all of what he said, but I would say that it's stuff that I remember up to now, even if I'm not even able to follow the advice and keep perhaps a couple more dollars in my pocket if I did. But certainly he was one who saw the importance of all roles as lawmakers, and he took it seriously, and as has been said by my colleague from the 9th, that he was one to stand up for what he believed in, and it did not matter if it put him on the wrong side of politics. At the end of the day, Vernon Malone would want to know that he left the house with his conscience clear. I would strive to follow that example among many others that he set. Vernon would also share history, particularly his days as a police officer. And he would show and speak about the level of discretion and wisdom and reason that police officers had to show or would show at that time. He would talk about, give examples of times when some situations that may have seemed volatile, that a simple conversation, a little bit of reasoning, when perhaps some of the persons on the beat today may resort to more resources related to force that might find themselves availing today. A simple conversation was the method that Vernon used, and one I would suggest seems to be deeper training is needed in relations. He also spoke of the role of policemen in the community and the relationships that they built on a day-to-day basis. And that relationship not only helped to settle those volatile situations, but it also helped in the resolution of crime. Detection rates were higher because the persons felt they could call upon or speak to Mr. Malone. They might have seen him by the gas station, in the supermarket, but they know they could pull him aside. And whatever they said to him was not something that they would be associated with their name going forward unless it absolutely had to be. Vernon Malone was also an entrepreneur with his wife as the proprietors of Isis Villas. And like many of us, I've had the opportunity to stay there and enjoy hospitality beyond what would normally be expected at any fine property. I'm proud to have been, as you said, what they talk about, now they call it staycation, but I'm proud to have said, well, okay, I've taken a weekend down at Isis, I've taken a weekend at Lambert, and different places at Long Bay on the island. And it was not just simply some place to rest, but it was some place to enjoy and have conversations because of Vernon and because of Isis. So, Mr. Speaker, I'll use this occasion to offer deepest condolences to Isis and Malcolm and other members of the White family, of the Malones, as well as Isis's own family, to whom he was very much a family member. I think that this occasion gives us opportunity to think about what are the qualities and characteristics that is needed among leadership, whether political leadership, whether those who head organizations such as the police force or other organizations in the territory. It's a time for us to reflect on those qualities and characteristics and realize that Vernon Malone met the highest standards, and we must seek for ourselves the highest standards as we seek to grow this territory. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable. I recognize the member for the 6th, Honorable Walwin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'm pleased for the opportunity to just say some brief words on the passing of Mr. Malone. Certainly, first, I would like to extend my profound condolences to his wife, Isis, his son, Malcolm, and the rest of the immediate and extended family. Mr. Speaker, an old English poet, John Donne, coined a phrase that any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind. And what that says to me in the passing of Mr. Malone is that the Virgin Islands community is indeed a much poorer community for the loss of Mr. Malone. When I was writing my tribute to be entered into the booklet for Mr. Malone, is when I was able to look a bit more closer, knowing him personally like everybody else in this house, a bit more closer at his contributions to this community. And while putting it together, I was saddened by the fact that it always takes death for us to recognize what people have done in our communities. I don't know how we're going to address it. But we have to find a better way of showing our appreciation to people and to highlight and celebrate what people have brought to the advancement of the Virgin Islands before they pass. It's unfortunate that Mr. Malone is not alive to hear all these glowing things that we're saying about him. And some of us may have never said them to him before. I myself never said that to him before. It's something that I think we have to sober up about. When I looked at Mr. Malone's contribution, certainly I think the biggest highlight of his career, being a man who wore many hats, was that of the police force. I think that was one of the crowning moments for him. And that was one of the areas where you saw how transformative of a leader he was. And when you look back at it, because I said I was writing that report, writing that tribute, and you look back at the things that Mr. Malone did in the police force, I cannot say with any honesty, and it's not to make anybody feel badly, the truth. I don't think we had any commissioner that has done as much as Mr. Malone did in terms of transforming the police force, from what my research have shown to me. And it's an inspiration to me and to many of us, it should be, particularly at a time now that our psyche is so low that we believe that we can't get anything right because of a report that came out and highlighted all the wrong things and all the bad things and left out all the good things. We're thinking that we are somewhat a failure, but when you look at what Mr. Malone has contributed to the development of this country, you have to feel inspired that one of our own people could have risen to that level and make such a monumental contribution. When you look, for instance, at establishing the Family and Juvenile Unit in the police force, the Major Crime Unit, the Marine Branch and the Response Unit, and his dedication to education. A number of persons who were police officers became attorneys and improved themselves in the field of education, making them more valuable to the force and to the community under the leadership of Mr. Malone. I can't say that there's been any other commissioner that I've seen that has made such a contribution like our own local commissioner, Mr. Malone. He moved into politics. It was one of the most exciting political races that I've ever witnessed, coming on the heels of the passing of Mr. Honorable Paul Watley. That race between him and Elmo Stout was a race to watch. And it was one of those races where competency and education was at the forefront of that race, because the politics here sometimes is a popularity contest, right? If you like the village idiot, he could win an election. But here it is, you had two competent persons, with Mr. Stout coming off from being the principal of the high school, with all the notoriety that came with that. And then you had Vernon Malone being a commissioner, being an attorney. It was a very exciting race. He lost that one, but anybody who was a student of politics would have known that he would have won the next time around, because the race should not have been that close. So it was no surprise that Mr. Malone made it back into the House. But when we look at people, we sometimes look at them through the lens of their profession or their occupation. And sometimes we don't strip enough to look at the character of those persons. But it was in politics I saw the character of Mr. Malone more than I've seen it before. And I think somebody alluded to it before, that yes, he ran with the Virgin Islands Party, but he was a person, a BV Islander first. He was a BV Islander first. He stood up for what was right. He moved to the beat of his own drum, and he did not care whether his colleague, because he put some, one time I was listening to Mr. Malone, debating, and he was talking about the economy and how there is no development, no hotel development, not at all happening. And I said to myself, well, Vaughan's sitting on the wrong side of the aisles. He sounded like an NDP because those were the things that the NDP was talking about at the time, but they were the truth. And Vernon didn't care about the party politics because so much now in this house, and not just in this house, but in other houses, I see people more concerned with being involved in party and cozying up and all the rest of it, and the issues of the people become secondary in all the club-like atmosphere that we create. But Vernon did not subscribe to that. He called it as he saw it and let the chips fall where they may. That was Vernon. And that's where I saw the character of that man come through. And it's a man, certainly, that is befitting of all the accolades, befitting of the highest standard of departure from this life that we're going to give to him. His family took good care of him. He was blessed with a lovely family. Isis loved Vernon, and she was proud of him. She was proud of him, and so did Malcolm. And I want to let them know that just like the rest of the Virgin Islands, we all appreciated Vernon, and we pray that God will comfort them and be with them in their time of bereavement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Walwin. I recognize the Minister of Communications and Works, Honorable Reimer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I see my light is blinking here. Ventilation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I too join with my colleagues in offering condolence to the family of the late Mr. Vernon Malone. And Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, it's it seems like it's a trend, as this is our fourth former legislator that we are here speaking about in this honorable house who have passed on. And Mr. Speaker, I just want to join in giving my remarks to Mr. Malone. My story about Mr. Malone has taken me back to high school. I remember back in high school when it seemed like it was a celebration at the time that we got our first local chief of police. I think it was back in 1992. I was in Fort Farm doing social studies, and we all celebrated and were excited that we have now our local chief of police. And I know he went on to serve for about 10 years thereafter. And, as a member mentioned, he did great things for the police. He was a trailblazer in terms of revolutionizing the police force with the things that he implemented. I mean, Mr. Speaker, it's a bit sad that, you don't give person the roses while they're living and speak about them. But I think he should be a historical figure here within our territory, because being the first is always good to be celebrated, but he was the first and he did great things while he carried out his duties. And we understand his whole path to becoming then a legislator, as to why we're here this afternoon speaking about Mr. Malone. And I just want to acknowledge his wife, his family, his wife and his son. I call her Auntie Isis, and Malcolm, because he was a real family man. And till his last breath, his family showed him that same love in terms of support for him. They was there with him throughout his illness, throughout his good times, throughout his bad times. And I know for them, they're comforted knowing that he will suffer no more as to where he is today. Madam Speaker, I just want to say on behalf, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the 5th District, on behalf of my family, my wife, my children, knowing that he was a 5th District resident, he was a 5th District voter, we want to acknowledge him and all that he did. We know that he hailed from the East, but you know, I recall his last time voting in 2019, him coming in to vote, and you know, sorry, coming in to vote. I acknowledge his contribution to the district, to the community, and we're proud to have him a part of the community. And I just want to lend my voice and offer my condolences. I went and I visited Auntie Isis, shared with her. We had stories about Mr. Malone. We had, shared the good times, the bad times, the sick times. But that is life. But the memories will definitely live on. And I wish the family well as they go through this sad time. And may his soul be at peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Reimer. I recognize Honorable Julian Fraser, member of the 3rd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will start my contribution by what would be reiterating the resolution that we're here debating today. I wasn't here when it was read, so I'm going to look at it again. It says, whereas the House of Assembly received the sad news of the untimely death of Mr. Vernon E. Malone, QPM, LLB, the first Virgin Islander Commissioner of the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force from 1992 to 2002, and a former territorial at-large representative, which occurred on Saturday, 4th May 2024. Whereas the late Mr. Vernon Malone, QPM, LLB, was first elected to the House of Assembly in August 2007 as territorial member and served until November 2011. Whereas during his tenure, he served as backbencher in the first House of Assembly of the Virgin Islands. Whereas all deceased former members of the Legislative Council and the House of Assembly of the Virgin Islands have lain in the chambers of the House of Assembly. Now therefore be it resolved that the House of Assembly continues this long-standing and well-established tradition and custom of recognizing the contributions and services of deceased former members. And be it further resolved that the House of Assembly of the Virgin Islands approves that the late Vernon E. Malone, QPM, LLB, in honor of his many contributions in the territory, will lie on the 20th day of June 2024 at the House of Assembly's chambers, Rotown, Tortola, and will be given an official funeral on the 22nd day of June 2024. And be it further resolved that the House of Assembly of the Virgin Islands also place on record its sincere gratitude and appreciation and extends heartfelt condolence to the family, friends, and all who love the former legislator, the late Mr. Vernon E. Malone, QPM, LLB. Mr. Speaker, I will take this opportunity at this time to extend my condolences to Miss Isis Malone, the wife of our good friend, former member Vernon Elroy Malone, and to his son Malcolm. Mr. Speaker, from my own personal knowledge, if Vernon Malone had to choose a wife and a son all over again, he would choose Isis and Malcolm. They have been at his side, they have been in front of him, they've been behind him, and they have done everything and more than everything that one can ask. And I commend them for the services that they have rendered and the dedication that they gave to Mr. Malone. I'd also like to extend condolences to his immediate family, his sisters, Phyllis, Edith, Lynette, Martlin, and Risa, Ritzia, and brother Meston and Jerry. And also, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make special mention of his nephew, Dr. Mitchell Penn. Mr. Speaker, Vernon Malone, he was made commissioner in 1992. 1992 was the year that I came to Tortola. And I'm sure by that time he had already been installed as a commissioner. But as commissioner, I remember Mr. Malone in those days. Before we came out here today, we were in the back. It was three of us in the back. Member for the 1st District, and the leader of the opposition and myself. And the member for the 1st District was talking to us about his experiences after the floods. In this case, it was before the floods, because he was telling us that luckily he had gotten it done before the floods, else his area, that particular area, would have flooded out. And he was telling us about a culvert that he was personally, he wasn't supervising, but he was observing being cleaned. And other things we were talking about. And the leader of the opposition said to us, he said something that I was wondering where he was going with this. He said, now look at you. You're a former president of the college. You got your PhD. He turned to me and said that I am a licensed architect. And he himself is an engineer. I'm a registered architect, he's a licensed engineer. And see what we're here talking about. Look at what we're here talking about as elected members of the House of Assembly. And I said that to say that Vernon coming to this house after being Commissioner of Police was a humbling experience for him. Because I remember him being Commissioner of Police. There was an official function in Yossendijk, and I was at Western Ferry Dock, waterfront. And I looked and I saw a blue vessel pulling up to the dock. This is a police sloop. And they picked up the Chief Minister, Lavity Stout at the time, to take him to Yossendijk. And it so happened that I got back to Tortola before the ferry vessel, after the function. And when the police sloop pulled up to that same dock, off came Vernon Malone. Now, imagine, he is disembarking from this special ferry that is dedicated to him as Commissioner of Police. And of course, right next to him was Isis with her big, broad white hat. Fitting of the position that which he held. And he should end up in this House of Assembly Did I say what happens in this House of Assembly to all people? Common, you can't be any more common than being a member of the House of Assembly. You walk out there and people are cussing on you. They're calling your names. They don't hold doors for you. They expect you to hold the doors for them. And this is where he ended up, in the House of Assembly. And it has absolutely nothing to do with stature. You have to be a person of the people to want to end up here. To give that up, come here. And he didn't just walk in here. Vernon fought to get in here. He knew what he was getting into. He fought to get in here. The member for the 6th District was talking about the by-election of 1995. And as far as he's concerned, it was the most exciting election that ever took place in the Virgin Islands. I can agree with him. I was there. I was there front and center. As a matter of fact, Foy and myself were the spokespeople for the party that Vernon was in. I had never had more fun in my life campaigning. I had fun because I really had no skin in the game. I couldn't lose, so I said what I had to say when I got up there. And we did, we talked. We had fun. It was fun. Vernon worked hard. He tried. But when it was all over and he lost, he was to let us know that he congratulated Mr. Stout. He said Mr. Stout was a very good friend of his. And I said to myself, son of a gun. I am out there, loose lips, saying anything that I needed to say to win an election, and he's talking about his friend. Okay. So, 2007 came, and he tried again. By this time, he learned that there was no friendship in politics. And guess what happened? You know, he won. No, you go out there and you try to win. Do what you have to do. And our experiences in political life together were interesting. Madam Speaker, and it leads me to make the point that the leader of the opposition mentioned a little earlier, that the photographs of all past and present members once adorned the walls and even the ceilings of the House. He was wondering when they're coming back. And I am suggesting, Madam Speaker, that a special effort be made to have those photographs displayed in these chambers once more. It's a tradition. It's probably the only thing that past members, dead and alive, will be remembered by in this House. And a special effort must be made to have them reinstalled. So we serve together, not just in the House of Assembly, Madam Speaker, in the first House of Assembly, we served together. And being a member of the House of Assembly at that time was a proud moment. We had people from all walks. Former police commissioner, attorneys, doctors. It seemed to have been the beginning of things big to come. Vernon had a way of, there were some words he used. And if you were to tell him the streets are in deplorable condition, there are potholes all over, but the Minister of Finance is saying, or the Minister for Communications and Works is saying, that there is no money to fix them. Vernon would say, we just passed a budget of $250 million. What do you mean there's no money? What do you mean this? What do you mean that? And when he says it, his face is like a stone faced, you know? He's not joking, he's serious. Tell me, what do you mean? He got attention. He had a passion for his home district, which is Long Look. When he sat in this house, he had a passion for things in Long Look. He wanted to see the restoration of certain historical objects, one of which was a well. I think it was Black Well. He wanted to restore that well. He also wanted to do a project in the Stickett area, the Stickett. One of the things you would learn about the group that we were in, or the group that I served in, it was district-centric, not at large. It was district-centric. If you were at large, you had a difficult time trying to get anything done because you had to come into somebody's district to do it. And therein lies the rub. It becomes a fight. Like you would go and ask the Minister of Finance for money to do a project. And the Minister of Finance would give you the money to do a project. And the district representative would be saying, okay, you got the money, let me see what you're going to do with it now. You're not coming into my district to do it. It was like that. So, because of those kind of anomalies and frictions and what have you, he may not have gotten some of the things that he wanted done. But it's not because he didn't want to have certain things done in his in the territory. Vernon served on a special projects committee with me as I was the chairman of that committee. He served as a special project on a committee, and that committee took us to Miami. And I remember when I was in Miami with Vernon, one of the persons that were on the trip said to me, Mr. Malone, he wanted to, he had his phobias. I don't know how many he had, but I know one phobia he had. They said Mr. Malone would not cross the street by himself. Somebody had to be with him when he's going to cross the street. So I said, really? Okay. So everybody, like I said, had little phobias, and that was one that he had. I don't know how many people would know this, because you would have to be in a metropolitan area with him to see it. Crossing the street in Rotterdam is like not that you'll do that. And another trip we took on this same project, we went to Panama. And I could say that unless he's been there before or after, we've seen the Panama Canal together at the same time, and other things that took place there. He was a major contributor to the success of the project. And one of the reasons you would want to have someone like him with you is because he is someone that is respected in the community. He's someone that can be trusted, and his judgment, if you piggyback on his judgment, your decisions could go a long way. And that is what happened in his case. Vernon used to have this place in Spring Gut. I happened to be there once, Spring Gut. And he talks about it endlessly, always talking about Spring Gut and what he does at Spring Gut and who he invites there and what they do when they get there. He goes there to play dominoes or whatever it is. And I was wondering to myself, how does he find the time to be all these places, to be there? From Brewers Bed to Spring Gut is not exactly a quick skip and a jump. But to him it was. And he would go there. I remember after he had left politics, I was leader of the opposition and I needed to nominate someone for the Police Service Commission. And he came to mind. I wanted Vernon to take the position so bad that I called him and I told him I wanted to see him. And this is something that you would normally speak to someone on the phone about. But I didn't want to speak to him on the phone because I didn't want a no for an answer. So he told me to meet him at Spring Gut. I go to Spring Gut, and it wasn't this. I'm sure it wasn't the Spring Gut that he always talked about because it was just after the hurricane. The hurricane had just passed, so I can see he was in the middle of rebuilding and all the rest of it. So I go there and I told him what I wanted. And he accepted. So that made me happy. Because I knew that he always had it within him some level of respect for me, which I did for him as well. And by him taking that position made me feel even better. So, Madam Speaker, this whole experience that we are going through, extending this particular vote of confidence in Vernon, each member of this House, extending this particular vote of confidence in him, and assuring his family that we appreciated him as a member of this body should go a long way, both for the family, both for us as an institution, and for the territory. Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I think that somewhere along the line we are losing something in this tradition. The resolution that was brought to this House, which I read a little earlier. Going forward, Madam Speaker, the debate on a resolution of that nature should be a part of a special sitting in the future. We should not be coming in the middle or the tail end of a sitting, sneaking in on the order paper a resolution of this magnitude. I consider it to be inappropriate. And going forward, Madam Speaker, it doesn't have to start with me. But going forward, Madam Speaker, I think that it should be a part of a special sitting of the House of Assembly. And every elected member of this House should be here. And we should dress a certain way, Madam Speaker, as well. I'm saying it here and I'm saying it publicly. Now, let no one think that I'm saying it for me. You could do it after me, but this is the way it should be in the future, Madam Speaker. And if memory serves me right, I think that we've done special sittings for people who have passed. And there should be no other business as well. It's the only business that it should be. We owe it to each other. We owe it to ourselves. And we owe it to the community to make this institution, as it's been referred to many times as the highest lawmaking body in the country. It's not only the highest lawmaking body in the country, Madam Speaker. is the highest institution of government in the country. I'll tell you why. As much as the executive comes in this house and beat their chest, Madam Speaker, they couldn't be in the executive unless they have been here. They got elected here first. And in many parts of the world, Madam Speaker, and it's the right thing to do, as is in many parts of the world, the judiciary is appointed by the executive. So here you go, you get elected to the legislature first, then you become a member of the executive, and the judiciary gets appointed by the legislature. And if you think I'm wrong, take a look at what's taking place in the United States with elected judges and other prosecutors and what have you. It's becoming a political weapon. So let us give the House of Assembly and its members, past and present, their due, Madam Speaker, and also give the institution its due. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable. I now recognize the member for the 2nd District, Honorable Melvin Turnbull.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise as other members have risen before me to give my contributions on this resolution before this Honorable House, where we are remembering and giving tribute to the life of a man who served this territory, who served as a member of the first House of Assembly with dignity, with integrity, and with honor. And I speak of our dearly departed Mr. Vernon E. Malone. Madam Speaker, Mr. Malone and I wouldn't have had the deep relationship as the member for the 3rd or even the leader of opposition, including the now acting premier, because his time of service, during his time of service, Madam Speaker, I would have been trying to get my education, both in his service to the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force as commissioner and as a member of the first House of Assembly, Madam Speaker, where he served. I would have been on my way to graduating from high school. But Madam Speaker, what I do know about Mr. Malone is that for a good portion of his life, he lived in the district where I now represent in the beautiful community of Brewers Bay with his lovely wife, who I call Auntie Isis Malone, and their son Malcolm. And they created a one-of-a-kind business operation in the hospitality field, Madam Speaker, called Isis Villas, which when you visit it or you take a look at it, you realize that it is built to a certain standard. There is a certain level of expectation that this couple had as they welcome persons from all walks of life throughout the world to come and stay at their villas and partake of the meals that they would have. And even on the local scene, Madam Speaker, when I was a little bit younger, when you hear you're going to Isis Villas, you're going to big place. You had to be a certain caliber of people to be invited to Isis Villas. Madam Speaker, I have a fond memory, however, back in my primary school days when Mr. Malone would have been the commissioner of police. And it is my memory as a child, so I have to share it. My aunt Elaine Klein, better known as Nani in Kinganen Bay, used to cook when there was cruise ships in her little bakery there, Klein's Bakery, across from the mango tree. And she used to cook and sell to the taxi men and all persons who would come for food during the day. And one particular day, Madam Speaker, she cooked some boiled fish. And Mr. Malone happened to be patrolling with Mr. Haywood, and I think it was Frank Devonish. And I sat down in that afternoon and I watched Mr. Malone mash up a bonito. Madam Speaker, let me tell you something. What a sight to behold. What was amazing, Madam Speaker, is not only did he just eat the fish, but he eat the fish, mash up the bone, them, mash up the head, all while having a conversation with the people around him. And when he was done, Madam Speaker, he said, bye, or something of the sort. And I just remember looking at my aunt because I had to go take up the plate them. And I looking at this plate and I said, but this was a fish. But one thing he enjoyed, Madam Speaker, was good food and good locally prepared food. And his son, Malcolm, now has taken on that ability to cook good food. But, Madam Speaker, when I look at the life of Auntie Isis, I'm not sure how, I don't recall how long they were married before he passed. But if you wanted to see what the Bible refers to as a virtuous woman who understood what it means to support and love her man or her husband, this is what Isis Malone has exemplified throughout the time that they have been married. And Madam Speaker, the times that I would spend after being elected with them, I always would make fun of Malcolm because I have never heard Malcolm call his mother mother or his father father. It is Mr. Malone and Mrs. Malone. And when I heard it the first time, I thought I was like, well, he just saying it because somebody visited. But no, that's what he calls them, Mr. Malone and Mrs. Malone. And it is that level of respect, Madam Speaker, that fast forwarding all the way to 2015, when I made the decision to run for political office and follow this great trail that has been blazed by men and women who have served this country to help to develop it to where it is. And I remember understanding the dynamics that I was up against in 2015. I was up against the Honorable J. Alvin Christopher, who would have been completing his 5th term or 20 years in this Honorable House. But I made a decision, Madam Speaker, to run, and I know what Honorable Christopher meant to the people of the 2nd District, but I know even more what he meant to the people of Bruce Bay. Not Bruce Bay, Bruce Bay. So going in to have a conversation with Mr. and Mrs. Malone, it was one that my Uncle Daniel Klein Pops tell me, out of respect. He said, you ain't getting a thing out of in here. But out of respect, we go. And we're going to go and we're going to listen. And what I'm saying, you're going to hear, because I've been here with our assistant behind Alvin. So ain't no way you getting them shift. But before our meeting, Madam Speaker, what I recall is that the Honorable Christopher had made an announcement, which I didn't believe. Up until the day of nomination, I didn't believe he was actually going to run at large. He made an announcement that he was going to run at large, and I got a call saying, he need to come, I need to come to see them because they have a tough decision to make. And I said, I've seen Honorable Alvin Christopher operate. And I know he's trying to play a trick on me because he want me to drop my guard to throw some licks in me. But he kept his decision, Madam Speaker, and I ended up going to meet Mr. and Mrs. Malone. And what I didn't realize was Mr. Malone was involved not just within his business, not just involved in his legal practice, but he was paying attention to what was happening with young people in the territory. And when I went to see him, I said, Mr. Malone, how are you? Well, I said honorable because I still call him honorable. How are you? And I said to Auntie, I said she went through the family background of how her and I are related. And he said, you're the one that does the finance. And you're the one that mentors the youth and you work with the courts. And I'm looking at him and I say, well, how does this man know all of this? And he says, I pay attention to young people who are aspiring to make a difference. He never transferred his vote to the second, but he always gave advice to his lovely wife. So the conversation was, well, Mr. Malone, well, she never said Mr. Malone. She said, Warren. She said, Warren, what do you think we should do? At that time, it was myself and Mr. Parsons, Alfred Parsons. He said, this young man seems like he have a good head on his shoulders, and he's into finance, so he would understand the things, and he loves young people, so that could bridge the gap. I think you should consider giving him a vote. He never told her what to do. He said, consider. From that day until every time I would visit, he would recall that conversation. Remember, I made a recommendation for you. And that's a recommendation, Madam Speaker, that I cherish because not only did I get to know him more personally, but Mr. Malone, during my first term of election, being elected, shared with me some information surrounding his political life. And one of the things that stood out, I didn't know it was going to come full circle so quickly. But one of the things that he shared with me was his contributions when he spoke out against his own government in the House about financing and the unscrupulous measures they were taking with using the public's purse that was not beneficial for the people of the Virgin Islands. And Madam Speaker, I read this thing and I said, well, this man is a bad man. That's what I was thinking to myself. This man is a bad man. And I remember going back and listening to it. And it took courage. But it spoke more to his integrity, Madam Speaker, that he was willing to not just go against the grain, but he was willing to speak truth to power and not just go along because he was a part of a particular party or the part of the government at the time. He used his beliefs and his principles and he stood at that. And I remember, Madam Speaker, in 2016 when I did the same thing, when I spoke up against the government that I was with. I remember getting a call from Auntie Isis, and I can't say what was said, but I would surmise it to say that they said I have a lot of courage. Madam Speaker, Mr. Malone as the commissioner, Mr. Malone as the lawyer, Mr. Malone as the servant of the people, Mr. Malone as the husband, and Mr. Malone as the father. Mr. Malone as a BV Islander who sacrificed his time, his talents, and his energies to give towards these Virgin Islands. This is yet another tremendous loss to the territory. I would hope that the rich history that he had in his contributions to this territory and during his life, Madam Speaker, would be documented somewhere by his family so that persons coming up could understand, because we are moving away from, and we have moved away from having a local commissioner. From Mr. Malone to Mr. Fraser, and then we went, according to the old people that would say, we went asunder. And it's time to bring these things back to serving his country in the legal profession. And what I know about him in the legal profession, Madam Speaker, he was never afraid to give advice or mentor anyone who was coming up in that field, to give and share with them what he would have become familiar with. So, Madam Speaker, the Bruce Bay community, his family coming out of the eastern end of the island, Anti-ISIS, Malcolm, 2nd District community, I stand to give honor and respect to the life of this man who served and served with integrity. And I pray, Madam Speaker, that God will give his wife and son the strength to weather this storm. I spoke to Anti-ISIS as recently as this morning, and I can't imagine how difficult this whole process is for her. She shared some things with me that I would not repeat, but I am praying that they get the strength to weather this difficult storm. And I pray that the life of Mr. Malone and his soul will rest in eternal peace, Madam Speaker. But for those of us that remain in this House of Assembly, may we not take our lives for granted, and may we not just look at his life because of whatever situations he may have faced with. But we have to take a closer look at our lives, Madam Speaker, and make sure that we are doing the best to serve the people that we have the opportunity to serve, and ensure that our families, Madam Speaker, are not neglected in the process, because you can't serve abroad if you're not serving first at home. So I support the efforts and the life that this honorable man would have given to this territory, Madam Speaker, and I pray that God will give his family peace. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I call on the Honorable Attorney General, Ms. Dawn Smith.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I am pleased for this opportunity to remember and I'm especially grateful because I'm speaking after Honorable Turnbull, because he expressed in his tribute and his contribution some of the same sentiments that I would have wanted to express and that I will express regarding Mr. Malone. Because sitting here and reflecting, I felt compelled to publicly express my gratitude for Mr. Malone's impact on the course of my life. And the word mentorship expressed by the honorable member for the 2nd District resonated with me. What also resonated is when he said that Mr. Malone had said to him, I pay attention to people who are aspiring to make a difference. Madam Speaker, when I see young people today embarking with all seriousness and zeal and energy on their lives, I wonder if that is how Mr. Malone saw me when, as an 18-year-old college student, he allowed me to review hundreds of case files at police headquarters. Madam Speaker, that data helped me to earn highest honors for my 1992 senior college thesis on offenses against the person in the Virgin Islands. And this one small thing, Madam Speaker, influenced the course of my life, not only because it was considered an excellent work by those who read it and graded it, but because when I reached out for help, I could not believe how easy it was. Mr. Malone, as they say, didn't bring me, didn't carry me. He didn't give me any runaround. He didn't flinch. He didn't hesitate. He accommodated me at the police headquarters for weeks and made sure that I had the space to do my work. I didn't have to be all over the place scrambling for subject, for data, for anything. And those case files, Madam Speaker, and my interaction with the police officers at the time gave me great insight into the community in a way that as a young woman, I would not have had that exposure. It also gave me great insight into policing that I would not have had otherwise, and that stays with me today. That is the value of mentorship, Madam Speaker. And in my experience, Mr. Malone led by example, and I certainly encourage those of us who can to mentor like he did. At one time, he was also my neighbor. And like the member for the 9th, I can attest to his warmth, his generosity, and his kindness. Mr. Malone led a remarkable life, Madam Speaker, and I recognize and appreciate his achievements. With that, Madam Speaker, I again express my gratitude and, of course, my most sincere condolences.
Thank you, Honorable Member. I now recognize the Deputy Speaker, Honorable Stacey Mather.
Good afternoon to everyone. Madam Speaker, I am not my usual self today, but I could not allow this sitting or this resolution to be put before the House and I not give my tribute to the late Honorable Vernon Malone. Madam Speaker, as a student in the BVI High School, I recall seeing a man dressed in what I would call beige or khaki, with a stature of a robust stature, who walked around straight, upright, very dignified in our community. And I would often wonder to myself, who is that man? As I transitioned from high school and I began teaching at the Althea Catholic Primary School, I would see this gentleman walking back and forth from the station to the magistrate's court, and I would admire him. I can recall one year during police week, we went to the station, and I saw that gentleman there, and the warmth that he had for the children that were there. I could understand why so many children at that time wanted to be in law enforcement. Mr. Malone made law enforcement in the BVI something that was attractive. Mr. Malone, in my opinion, brought education, ethics, and a reputable view to being a leader in the BVI that stood up for what was right. He was not, unlike us in this House of Assembly, to not be victims of people who wanted to assassinate his character. But to stand in a country that is so small and stand up for law and justice, Mr. Malone, in my opinion, was iconic for doing so. Madam Speaker, when I transitioned to the eastern end of the island, I would run into Mr. Malone occasionally. And like many others, I'll admit, I could have sworn that his office was at Capriccio's, because this is where I saw him most. Mr. Malone would hail out to me and he would say, "Matha, you're doing well. Matha, you're doing good. Matha, I see you." So when I hear the member to the left of me and or AG mention that he said that he paid attention, this is accurate. Madam Speaker, when I began to revere Mr. Malone even further, and it was alluded to earlier, is when he stood in this House of Assembly and he stood alone and he spoke out about something that he felt was again wrong. Something our own were doing to ourselves as elected leaders. And my admiration for this man grew even further. Madam Speaker, what I saw from Mr. Malone was love for his country. And I make no apologies when I look at where we are now today, Madam Speaker. I wish that Honorable Malone was a soldier sitting in this room today. Madam Speaker, getting to know Mrs. Malone has been a joy and an experience, and also Malcolm. Mrs. Malone and I became quite close before the hurricanes, but I do have a memory of Mrs. Malone and Mr. Malone that I cherish. I was on the western side, down by Big Ben's one day, and I saw this lady jump out of a vehicle, go into the supermarket to grab something. And I paid attention to this ring on her finger that I thought was very impressive. I said, "Ma'am, your husband loves you." And she looked at me and she smiled and she said, "Very much." Because, Madam Speaker, on a teacher's salary at that time, one could never think of purchasing something like that. And Mrs. Malone said, "I've been married for many, many years, young man." Madam Speaker, I exited the supermarket and I looked and I saw Mr. Malone. And I said, "Okay, that is that lady's husband. I know that man." Because I wasn't sure who Mrs. Malone was at the time. But what I saw there again was love. Madam Speaker, getting to know Mrs. Malone over the years, I have seen a woman who stands for her family, her country, but above all, she loves and loved her husband in the purest way that I have ever seen love and affection being shown by a couple. Madam Speaker, envious? No. But admirable? I think is beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So, Mrs. Malone, who I call mommy every once in a while, I know you're going to hear this. I feel your pain. Because when I spoke to you, you said to me, you lost your best friend. This country has lost a soldier, a leader. This House of Assembly honors this man today because it's timely. And I will not echo what was said by the member for the third, but I am mindful, given his seniority, the comments that he made, and perhaps the reasons why he made them. It is not for any of us who have come after to truly judge what someone has contributed to our country and our territory, but rather for us to understand that the people who put them here did it for a reason, and therefore all honor must be given to them. Madam Speaker, I thank you for the time, and may Honorable Vernon Malone's legacy in this country continue to be honored. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable. I recognize the Acting Premier, Honorable Lorna Smith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to speak on the resolution before the House honoring the memory of the late Honorable Vernon E. Malone. Madam Speaker, before I get started, I'd like to set the record straight, if I may, in terms of what the member for the third said. He was right in principle, but the reason why this session was started yesterday was because the Premier had to leave on duty travel and so wanted to make his contribution to this resolution before his departure. There was certainly no disrespect meant, and I do 100% agree with the member that this should be the only item, this resolution should be the only item on the agenda. And I'm grateful to you, Madam Speaker, for so agreeing. Madam Speaker, I know, or I knew, the late Honorable Vernon Malone mostly as Commissioner of Police, and I had intended to speak mostly on that. But listening to members of this House, I have learned so much about him as a member of this House of Assembly, and so I am in a position to pay tribute on both counts. I'd like to start by extending my deepest condolences to his wife, my dear friend Isis Malone, and her son, who is also a dear friend, Malcolm, on this sad occasion of the passing of their husband and father. Theirs was indeed, for Isis and Vernon, a marriage made in heaven, a romance that lasted for 53 plus years. And I can imagine the sadness that she has felt on his passing. Equally, I would like to extend my condolences to his brothers, his sisters, his nieces, nephews, and other relatives that are left to mourn. And I trust that Vernon's soul, in fact, I believe his soul now rests in peace. One member, I believe it was the Deputy Speaker, spoke about the stature of the late Honorable Vernon Malone. That was where I was going to start. And I was going to say that he had the stature of a commissioner of police. He had the height, he had the body, he had the carriage of a commissioner of police. The late Honorable Vernon Malone studied law. He was not only educated in policing, he studied law to even better contribute to the police force. And as Commissioner of Police, he, as the Attorney General mentioned, as well as the member from the second, he was committed to mentoring and training. Those were the days, Madam Speaker, the days when the police force was a police force. And I'm not taking anything away from anybody, but those were the days I remember the police force being outstanding. And I agree with the member from the 6th in stating that it is wrong for anyone to denigrate, call down the contribution made by the likes of the late Honorable Vernon Malone in terms of policing. He did much for the police force in terms of training. As was said, he was the one who encouraged other police officers to study law and related professions. He was the one who started the Marine Shore Base, and he was the one who started the juvenile section for the police force. Now, I remember, because as was said, there are a few of us who are his contemporaries in this house. I remember when every year on your calendar was Police Week. And, Madam Speaker, it was a week to remember. It started with the police start leading a parade. I believe it was the Government House, all the way up here to the courthouse. And it was the beginning of a week that was placed in our calendars and that we all remember. Every day or every evening, there was something special. Whether it was to remember or to honor persons in the community, and I had the honor of being honored myself one year, but there were so many other persons who were honored for their contributions to the community, whether it was for a special project, whether it was for young people, whether it was to mentor people. It was a week that we all remember. And it wasn't always, but many times, that week culminated with the event, one of the events of the year, the police ball. The police ball. Where have those days gone to? And how can we have people coming in here and telling us that we have no legacy, we have no training, we have no ability, we have done nothing to further policing in the country, when so much was done, and so much was done by the late Vernon Malone. And other persons in the police force now, as well as other commissioners of police. Yes, I remember Mr. Saddleback Samuels. Can't remember his name. What was his name? Winston. No. Mr. Samuels. And I don't know if the leader of the opposition remembers Mr. Hull. But those were persons who really contributed to policing. And Mr. Warren as well, thank you very much, member. Those were people who contributed so much to the depth and the strength of our police force. I am not going to stand here and say there may not be some bad apples, but I am not going to stand up and say that all is bad or most is bad about the police force. I continue to be grateful to the likes of the late Honorable Vernon Malone and his legacy that he left. Madam Speaker, the police force was rarely on parade on the Queen's birthday. Now the King, but it was the Queen. The Queen's birthday parade. They marched in unison. They marched beautifully. They carried out their instructions. It was a sight to behold. We have to get back there, and there is no reason why we cannot do so. Madam Speaker, the other thing that the late Honorable Vernon Malone contributed to or paid very special attention to was police officers on the beat. You would see police officers on their feet walking around Road Town or walking around the community. We have to get back there if we are going to feel a sense of safety and security, if we are going to feel that the men and women in uniform who are there to protect us are doing so. It is one thing that I am calling for us to get our police men and women back on the beat, walking around in our community, as well as community policing, real community policing. I remember, some of you might remember, there was all of us remember that Mrs. Malone, Mrs. Isis Malone, was a senior member of the bank. Bank of Scotia, now called Republic, but Scotia Bank. And she believed in all her managers. She served them faithfully, country managers. But the one she believed in was Terry Bell. Terry Bell was a partner, yes. And Terry Bell made sure that the children of the BVI at Christmas time, through the police, were able to get gifts, especially those who could not afford it, were able to receive presents. That is one piece of evidence of what I call community policing. And I know that, Madam Speaker, there are persons who have come after him who are trying to do the same, and I would encourage all of us to support them in as many ways as they can. I also want to pay tribute to the Honorable Vernon Malone, late Honorable Vernon Malone, the businessman, in terms of not just his law practice, but as has been said by several speakers before me, in terms of the one-of-a-kind property that was established at Brewers Bay called Isis Villas. It's a place, I have also visited Isis in this period, and we've talked and laughed about the good times and the not so good times, and the times when the area was a farmland. And I understand now why there are such verdant trees and beautiful flowers and so on. It's because of the quality of the land. Isis Villas is one of a kind, and we know it bears the name Isis, but we know that Vernon also contributed to this lovely property. I was not aware, Madam Speaker, of the contribution that the late Honorable Malone made to our laws, but especially the Noise Abatement Act. Now, as a policeman, he would have been very conscious of the importance of living in a quiet place, a place of tranquility, a place where you can hear your own ears. Nowadays, you call the police and all kinds of reasons are given to you why this law that is on our books and has been on our books since 2007, why it cannot be enforced. All kinds of reasons. So the noise continues unabated. We have to, Madam Speaker, get back to where we were, and it's not too late. I make the same point in relation to the dark tints. I don't remember what that law was called, Madam AG, but that is also an important act. I agree, Madam Speaker, as I come to the end of my remarks, on two things. The late Honorable Vernon Malone was indeed, as the member for Communications and Work said, a trailblazer in revolutionizing the police force, and as the member for the Sixth said, he was a transformative leader. Madam Speaker, these are very challenging times for us, and we must take a step back and look at where we were and decide together where we want to go in terms of making sure that this country continues to move forward in a way that is in the interest of all of the people of this territory. Again, my condolences to the family of the late Vernon E. Malone, and may his soul continue to rest in peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable. I now call on the acting premier to wrap up.
Madam Speaker, sorry? Yes, no, I could say more. Again, I would like to thank all the members of this House for their contribution to this resolution. The Premier made his contribution yesterday, and we look forward to being here, all of us, on Thursday to pay our last respects, or penultimate respects, because we're going to see him again on Saturday, to pay our penultimate respects to the late Vernon E. Malone. I understand I have to say KPM rather than QPM. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable. Honorable, a motion has been moved and seconded. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The motion is passed. I call upon the clerk.
Private members' business.
Go again.
Item 9, other business.
Go again. Go again.
Item 10, adjournment.
I call upon the acting premier.
Madam Speaker, I move that this House be now adjourned sine die.
Thank you, honorable members. Honorable members, the motion has been moved and seconded. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. This House is now adjourned sine die.
After you done making trouble.